Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Dr. Turner. I'm the curator of the Charles L. Blockson Afro-American collection, and I'm delighted to have a woman scholar here who we know very well, Dr. Ife Williams. And I'm delighted for a number of reasons because she comes here and does research also. So I'm going to bring up Dr. Williams, and we're going to have a wonderful program, very informative. And when she's done, if anyone has any questions, she'll address them for you. Thank you.
Thank you. Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for weathering the rain and coming out this afternoon to hear my presentation on police brutality, a Philadelphia story. Before we started, I have a freshman here who's doing a story, and she wanted to know how I started this project, and I related to her. I was about 17 years old. I was not political at all. Matter of fact, a little on the nut side. But what happened, a young man was in a sheriff's van, and he was in City Hall courtyard being ushered off the bus into the City Hall to go to court. He was handcuffed, and the police said that he tried to run away, and they shot him in the back of the head. It disappeared. His name wasn't even in the paper. You know, the police officer was never held accountable. It just went away. And that always stuck with me. It just followed me around. And by the time I was in graduate school, years later, I was asked, what is your dissertation topic? And I said, police brutality in Philadelphia. I wanted to know why. How could something like that happen and go unnoticed, you know? So I started on my dissertation, and some kind of way through the magic of the Blockson collection, they got a hold of my dissertation. I still don't know how they found it, and it was here. And when I would come do research, my great friend, Mrs. Laku, would always say, you know what? You need to publish this. She says, every time someone comes in and asks about police brutality in Philadelphia, I give them this dissertation. You know, and she just said, you have to do it. And years and years. So I finally, make a long story real long, I published. She was the first person to receive a signed copy. I didn't even know how to sign. She showed me, this is the page you sign on. Put your name here. And so now the finished work lives here at the Blockson collection, where I did a lot of the research for the book. So I'm back home again. All right. So what did I do with the clicker? Okay. Okay. So my major thesis is what's called predacious policing. What we see is that there are a lot of problems with police brutality, but one of the major problems centers in policing itself. The police are charged with keeping order, not necessarily conforming to law. Those are two different things. And everything they do is within the law, okay? Or can be interpreted to be within the law. So it comes out to be justified. So the police act under what the Supreme Court called the color of law. So they're doing their job. So the police have become one of the most lawless sectors of society because they really don't have laws that hold them. So this work is a case study of police brutality looking at Philadelphia. Now, in my dissertation, what I wanted to show was that Philadelphia has historical cultural environment of racism and violence that led to the growth of the police. But that is difficult to actually prove scientifically. You really can't do that. So I just went back and showed early in Philadelphia's history, you had major riots. Now you had riots among the whites, the different ethnic groups, the Polish, the Irish. So you know when black people came in, it was open season. In 1918, even though there were riots prior to that, this is a major riot. Adela Bond, the woman that you see up in the left, bought a house in South Philadelphia, and she didn't know that the neighbors, of course, did not want any black people on the block. She tried to get her money back once she found out, but of course she couldn't. So one day she was coming home from work and the neighbors started throwing rocks at her. So she ran into the house, and remember it's 1918, you don't have a phone, you don't have a cell phone, anything. So what she did was she took a gun and shot it up in the air. Well, you know, bullets that go up come down. And of course one person was injured in it, and it erupted a major riot. And when we say riot before 1960s, what we're talking about are whites going into the black community and burning down their house, taking everything out the house, throwing it in the street, beating people up. And what was the role of the police? And if you see in the cartoon, this is from a Tribune article, you see the police standing there. Actually, the police went to some of the homes of the black people and confiscated their guns. And then the city passed an act said that black people couldn't even buy any guns to protect themselves. So they had no protection whatsoever. But what this did, it led to the formation of one of the earliest civic organizations, the Colored Protective Association. And what they did was they gave their members little cards that said that they were part of the CPA. So anytime they were harassed by the police, they would just take out their card and show it to the police, and the police would leave them alone. Also, during this riot, this was so crazy, a man was arrested by the police officer. He was beaten up, taken to the hospital. While he was laying on the gurney, the police officer climbed on the gurney and started beating him up again. So a black officer pulled him off. So that was one of the first police brutality cases of the city. And it went to court, but by the time they got to court, the black officer said that he didn't see anything. So it didn't go. But they did. They had a number of cases, and they were successful in getting some of the police moved to a different district out of their area. 1958, Philadelphia is the first city in the United States to get a civilian police review board. Of course, they were very limited. And later on, they're going to be disbanded, of course, by Rizzo. He was like, we don't, there's no such thing as police brutality in Philadelphia. We do not need a police review board. But they were always under constant attack. This is 1960. This was one of the first major protests. You have here 4,500 civilians. So what happened was a police officer, Officer Marinelli, gets a call on the radio that says there was a robbery. So he goes to the area and he observes a man running down the street. So he just assumed that this man stole something, and he shoots him. And then while he's shooting at him, not one time, but a couple of times, he shoots an innocent bystander, this woman. And when her mother found out her daughter was killed, the mother had a heart attack, and then she died. So it's 3 people, right? And, of course, Marinelli was not held accountable for any action. So what they did in this protest, you see they hired the 3 hearse for each body, and they just rode around City Hall. They just kept going around and around. So at the time, the city was 22% black, but 90% of the people killed by police at that time were black. So it was a major, this has always been a major problem in this city. So then we get Frank Rizzo in office, and I love this picture with him. Nixon was his hero. And of course, we know Nixon's stand was law and order. He loved Nixon. He starts a civilian, well, actually, a civilian affairs unit had started before he took office. But what he did was he turned it into a little COINTELPRO project. He had files on 18,000 people. And actually, it said that the FBI really got lessons from Rizzo. He had dossiers on everybody. He militarized the police, got in K-9 units. One of the SNCC workers said we could always depend on Rizzo to overreact. You know, if there was a protest or something, he was going to come out with 1,000 police officers, which we'll see with MOVE. It was hundreds of police officers sent into the city. He sent heavily armed police, over 1,000 police to the SNCC headquarters. Now, on the other side, the only way Rizzo could have ascended like he did was he had to have some black support. And he did. He had some black support. You had a few African-American officers. You're not going to get your first black officer till like 1880. And after that, the numbers stay low. But he did promote a few. But actually, the whole number of police officers of color decreased under Rizzo. And forget women. Women aren't going to come in until way later, and that's only going to be through court order. Now, 1964, this is what I call a watershed moment. This really changed the whole game. A lot of things happened here. All right, because of this riot, and of course, 99% of the riots in America, we look at, the police are somewhere there at the beginning. And of course, in this one, a rumor was spread that a pregnant woman was beaten by a police officer. Actually, it was I don't know if she was pregnant or not, but it was a woman in this intersection, and the police were trying to get her out of the car for some odd reason, and then the story ballooned from there. So the riot started. Now, Commissioner at that time, Leary, his strategy was to sacrifice property and save lives. He knew if the police went in there with their arms drawn and start shooting people, it was going to be a mess. So he told the police officers to stand down. All right? So by this time, Rizzo was head of the foot patrols. He was livid with Leary. Right? So what this did was, the same thing with all the other 60s riots, is the government responded with increased militarization. Instead of putting money in for social services, money gets diverted to the police. Because of Leary's order, Rizzo pulls away from Leary, so you get a major fracture between the rank and file and the superiors that, in my opinion, still lasts until today. And I think this was one of the major problems with Outlaw, and another major problem with Ramsey. We're going to see what's going to happen with Bethel. You know, the rank and file have their own way of doing things, you know, and Rizzo condoned that. Then you also widen the gap between the black elite and the masses, because here you have your black bourgeoisie saying they wanted to be deputized. What is it? Sadie Alexander Moselle and her husband, and they actually wanted to be deputized to go into North Philly and put people under control. You know, so people were like, "Are you kidding?" So then this just widened that. Next, you have your fraternal order of police, major problem that we have today. Fraternal order of police they're not a union, they're an association, right? They started off as like a social club. But this act politicized them. The head of the FOP sent out all kinds of misinformation about how the police were put in danger because of Leary's order, the same type of rhetoric we hear today. Every time you try to do something with the police, you're taking away their power. And, of course, Frank Rizzo comes out of this a hero. You know, later on, Leary's going to leave, and Mayor Tate's going to make Rizzo the commissioner, and Tate thought it was his best appointment ever. And then it increased the power of the police department. They became more insulated from the wider community and more repressive. Now, in the 60s, we had a number of civic organizations in Philly. Philadelphia actually, and Brother Carr mentioned Cecil B. Moore. Under Cecil B. Moore, we had the largest march at that time in support of the Birmingham movement. Also, the NAACP had the largest number of members in the United States at that time. So everybody else was here, SCLC. Now, what's important, what I want you to put a mental clip note on, is the Council of Organizations was 22 organizations that actually pulled together. And you had your Black Panthers. Also, the Revolutionary Action Movement was one of the only movements that talked about armed resistance. And all of these groups and more were right here in the city, and all of them had in their platform to do something about police brutality. They all had that in common, right? But their primary focus, I mean, you look at the Free Library Group, what they really wanted to do was to educate people. Look at the Black Panthers. The other Black Panther organizations used to talk about Philadelphia Panthers being too soft, because what was their focus? Health care. They did sickle cell testing, right? Breakfast programs. They saved over 200 people with sickle cell. They were able to identify them, and they were able to get treatment. So it was all about building up the community. But we had Rizzo, so after a while, a lot of groups are going to become radicalized to oppose that system. This is really what radicalized them, was the 1968 Panther Raid. Once this happened, especially COPAR, with all your civic organizations, they were like, this is just too much. This is too much. You've gone over the top. Rizzo, it's interesting. Rizzo was at a black tie affair, and this doesn't have a thing. Oops. I was looking for a, but anyway, if he has a black tie affair, I don't know if you could see, he had a stick under, who goes to a black tie affair with a bully club? All right. Philadelphia police are the last police in the nation to stop using those clubs, and they were actually metal with leather around them. And one of the Panthers stated that when they would hit the ground, sometimes you could see sparks coming up from them. And so this is what they were hitting people with. Now, Rizzo states that he did not order the Panthers to undress. He said they did that just to embarrass him. But the Panthers said that, yes, they were ordered to undress, and that they were shooting guns over their head and shaking the building. They took all their money. So all of these groups, eventually, Panthers, SNCC, SCLC, they would really be destroyed by Rizzo, constantly, just attacking him. This is the same strategy he used with MOVE. If you keep arresting them, you can bankrupt them, all right? Because you got to keep bailing them out. So between the raids and the arrests, they eventually would no longer be here. But this incident pushed COPAR into taking the city to court. So here we have our first major case, is Rizzo v. Good in 1976. And this case is so interesting. Actually, it's going to go to the Supreme Court. But what they tried to do, and what I wanted to do in my dissertation, but I couldn't, was to link Rizzo with police brutality, okay? Because the police institution would not do anything about brutality, then they must be supporting it, right? So this is what they wanted. They asked for an injunction against the Philadelphia police. One thing they wanted was a seamless system of complaining. At that time, actually up into the 1970s, if you had a complaint against the police, you actually had to walk into the precinct, okay? Then you had to file a complaint with the officer at the desk, who did not have any forms. He would just write it on the side, and then you have to hope that somehow or another this would be followed up. All right, and you would have to take a lie detector test, and the police officer that you accuse is allowed to be in the room with you. Their rule is that they can face their accuser. So there was no system. So they came up with a series of things that they could do. And what the court found was they said, yes, the police are racist. The court just said, yes, they are racist. They looked at the number of people who were stopped, how many people were arrested. They looked at all the cases of brutality. There was no question. So the court devised, along with the ACLU, along with COPAR, a list of suggestions for the police to do, you know. And the police agreed. They said, okay, we'll do it. You know, we'll set up a system of lodging complaints, you know, whatever you want us to do. The case goes to the Supreme Court. Supreme Court reversed. You know, even the judges said this was just so sad, because this really could have gone nationwide, where we would have, because we still don't have nationwide a standard for the police. None, right? It goes there. So one of the arguments made in the case, what the Supreme Court said, is very interesting. As citizens, yes, we are free to not be subjected to police brutality. However, police brutality is not a constitutional right. So if you get beaten up by a police officer, you have to find other means. We cannot give you an injunction over brutality. So on the one hand, they're saying, as the Supreme Court does, you know, they give those two-legged rules, but really police brutality is we're not constitutionally protected against that. No. So what happens is they go back to the drawing board, COPAR and everybody else, and under the Attorney General of that time, Civiletti, they file again in 1979. And in this case, they come out stronger here. They give an entire list. They had hundreds of people who had been brutalized and who had testified against. And again, they wanted the federal government to step in, this time not asking for an injunction, but also to hold and this is very key too, that I think should happen. If you hold the superiors responsible, then maybe it'll trickle down, right? This case doesn't even make it to the Supreme Court. What happened is the court rules that the Attorney General does not have standing. So it just failed. But these are two landmark decisions, and of course we know that the decisions that the Supreme Court makes becomes law. And actually, the first brutality case was actually 1935, was a Screws case. And this is the major problem. They set up the problem we have today. A black man in Georgia, 1935, was beaten to death by the sheriff, right? They go to court. Of course, the sheriff is not charged with murder. He's charged with withholding Robert Hall's rights to due process. Instead of having a trial, being arrested, going through the whole channel, you're going to actually beat him to death, right? An all-white jury in Georgia found the sheriff guilty. Isn't that amazing? All-white jury, yeah. Case goes to the Supreme Court. Supreme Court reverses. They reverse. They said you have to prove that the sheriff had the intention of taking away his rights. And this is the criteria that's used today. You have to prove willful intent of the officer. And even in this case, people heard Sheriff Screws say, "I'm gonna get that." You know, they heard that, but it wasn't enough to substantiate willful intent. So the sheriff was exonerated. So that's what we have today. So the police have a whole legal arsenal of things. Objective reasonableness, they have to prove intent. Are they in danger? Are they protecting other people? They can establish any of the above, which they can, then the homicide is justifiable. Now, internal investigation. Again, this was one of the problems with, in 1960, with going into the office. And you can see through this maze, and this is what we still have today, this maze of how you have to go through the Philadelphia Police Department in order to charge an officer for disciplinary actions. And at any stage, the police commissioner can stop it and just say, and exonerate the officer. And what we have found is the majority of police officers, if they are disciplined, they get counseling. And they don't really consider counseling punishment, but they will get counseling. Very rarely will you see an officer who is dismissed. And if they are dismissed or fired, then we have the good old fraternal order of police, right? Charles Ramsey fired 200 police officers, 200. Every one of them got their job back. Every one, right? FOP has these high-powered lawyers. They get in there, they try to negotiate, and these people are right back on the job. So the police, this is a quote by Mumia, they are really insulated. They are really an island all within themselves, you know, that no one can touch them, not even city officials. Then we have MOVE 1978. All right. And what I hold here is when MOVE started, most people will know, they weren't radical. They were back to life nature people. Their first protest was at the zoo over the caging of animals. That was their first protest. Right? So what happens? A couple of things happen. And my theory is that the police actually radicalized MOVE. They really did. And a turning point with MOVE was 1976. A MOVE member had been arrested. That was like everyday thing. They had been arrested anywhere between 100 and 500 times between 1976 and 1980. 500 times. And each time it was a fine that they had to pay. Again, the same strategy. Let's bankrupt them. But whoever was arrested came back. And, of course, the other members were celebrating. They were in the front yard. And this is the testimony of one of the neighbors. They were in the front yard just, you know, yay, we're glad you're back. And the police came in and attacked them. The police version is MOVE was throwing rocks at them, and so they had to come in. But anyway, in the scuffle, baby life gets killed. Brand new baby gets killed. Police denied it. They said there was no baby, okay? But there was a baby because afterwards they held a meeting and invited people from city council in, and they actually saw a baby in a coffin. So yeah, a baby was killed. And I think that was a turning point. They had been going back and forth with the police. They did protest brutality. They did try to get community people involved. They said, look, we will support you in your case. But because of the way MOVE looked and acted, you know, people were like, I don't know, I'm good. I'm on my own. I don't need you to help me. But they protested. And in one of their protests in front of a police precinct, I think the one on Lansdowne Avenue, of course, they set up their bullhorn, and they're standing out there, and the police, of course, come out, tell them they had to move. So what they did was the city criminalized profanity. And if you know anything about MOVE, every other word, you know, MF this, that. So that was the only grounds they had to arrest MOVE. Once they did that with profanity. So it kind of like, y'all have to move. And, of course, a scuffle ensues, and people get hurt. And so with each one, it gets worse and worse. All of their rights were taken away. They didn't have any rights. They were beaten in the courtroom in front of the judge. In one case, a police officer was sitting in the back of the courtroom when Delbert Africa was being tried. The police officer jumped over people and jumped on Delbert and beat him in the courtroom, and the judge just sat there. You know, and this is documented. She was like, yeah, well, they did it. This was in Judge Jameson's office. Courtroom. They just beat him like that. They were tried in absentia. In one case, Delbert Africa was sitting in the hallway. He wasn't even in the courtroom, and they sentenced him. right? And then you talk about exorbitant fines, you know, 25,000, 50,000, 100,000 for contempt of court. So this became their life. So of course it's going to lead up to 1978, where you see the porch protest, and actually everything they did was constitutional. They had their guns. You see they're pointed up. You have the right to protect yourself, your home. They weren't shooting anybody. The city couldn't get them on anything. Only way they could get them was L&I. The city wanted to go in and inspect. Right? And they were like, we're not letting you in here. You know, we're not doing that. So it just became more hostile, and you know what's going to happen. The police are going to finally go in. And during that, Delbert Africa comes out. You see the middle image. He comes out with his hands up, no shirt on, and you can see the officer swinging back with his helmet, getting ready to hit him upside the head. You see they drag him across the street by his hair. They kick him, beat him. They kicked him all into his groin. They kicked him in his groin. He had to get stitches in his groin. You know, somebody said, Charles Bowser said, the psyche of somebody who does that to a black man. What is going on here? Well, this is before cell phones, and everything was captured on the news. The news caught this video. So the people pushed to have those officers. Actually, it's 3 officers. You only see 2 here, Zagami, Mulvihill, and Geist. The people wanted those 3 officers prosecuted, and that was going to be led by Alfonso Deal, who was head at the time. He was head of not only NAACP but the Guardian Civic League, the black police officers. So it's going to take the stalling. You know, it takes a year before the names of the officers are even released, and then it's going to be another year before they actually go to trial. So what I wanted to do here, my argument is that we really do not have any redress through the legal system against brutality. So what I did as a young student, like we have here, is I covered the trial. You know, I went to the trial every day of the 3 officers, and it was the same story. What can I tell you? All white jury. Oh, this was new. They couldn't get an all white jury in Philadelphia, so they bust in some white people from Dauphin County to serve as jurors. All right? These people have probably never even seen a black person other than Bill Cosby on TV. They were totally clueless. So you had an all-white jury there. And then each officer got on a stand. You could see it. I mean, perfect performance, you know, with the tears and the gasping for air. And I forgot to mention what happened in 1978. A police officer was shot. When it first happened, Officer Ramp was killed. The news said that it was friendly fire, that the bullet went in his back and exited his chest. But by the time the 9 MOVE members went to court, the coroner changed his report and said the bullet entered his chest and exited his back. Now you see in the rubble, the entire house was destroyed, so you did not have any evidence. They did admit that the gun that was used was not really found on the MOVE home, but you see a picture of one of the officers carrying the type of gun that killed Ramp. So the story is kind of shaky, but the judge convicted all 9 of them to life. He said, y'all want to be tried as a family? I'm going to convict you as a family. And then he said, I don't know who shot Ramp. The judge admitted, I don't know. Could have been the police, it could have been MOVE. I don't care, but all of them are going to prison. All right? So here's Delbert Africa when he was released, and he died shortly thereafter. And another thing that happens with in police brutality cases, of course, demonization of the victim. And of course, with MOVE, you didn't have to go too far. You know, they were already demonized by the media and everybody else. But one strategy the defense attorney used was had the whole courtroom moved into another room that had a cage in it. And the cage came from the cell down below. And they brought Delbert Africa up. Of course, Delbert, he didn't know what was going on. They just woke him up one morning, shackled him, and brought him down to City Hall. So, of course, when he gets up into the courtroom, first thing he says is, what the F is this? Why you have me in here? Why you have me shackled? Why are we going through this? And you could see the jurors just huddled up together, and one even laughed and said, "Oh, we don't have to go to the zoo today." These it was like, stop bringing in the move people. And they brought Phil in, and Phil did the same thing. And so after that, the judge stopped the trial. He just stopped it. And he says, we need a lightning rod to go through this move situation. And I'm going to be that lightning rod. And I'm going to congratulate the officers for their bravery and end this case. Technically, that's unconstitutional, but if the ruling is in your favor, who's going to fight it? And the case was ended. Judge Kabaki did that. Only in Philadelphia. So you have your 9 members now serving life. So the rest of the MOVE members moved to West Philly and get a house. And what they really did try. They tried to get an audience with the mayor, the governor, civic groups. They wanted a retrial. How do you convict 9 people for the murder of one person that you don't even know if they really shot him? How do you do that? We need a new trial. No one would listen. No one would give them an audience. All right? So what they did was they built a pillbox on top of their house, got a bullhorn. Every day they got out there and start yelling and screaming, and of course the neighbors were all upset, children were all upset. And this is another one of those stories. City officials say that they were told, hands off on MOVE. Don't do anything. At the time Good was mayor, he said he never gave that order. So what do we know? Every day, I know you can't really see, but this block is right across the street from the park. Every day the children were in the park. Every day. They could have been picked up any time for truancy or whatever. They were out there. But no, they just left them alone. So in May, the police decided to go in, dropped a device, and the fire started. Now, what's very interesting here, do you remember Zagami, Mobile Hill, and Geist? Now, I think I'm talking to my students. Y'all remember those 3 officers? Do y'all remember them? Right behind the houses is an alleyway. Who was perched behind the house? Zagami, Mobile Hill, shooting at the house. So what Ramona Africa said, they tried to get out the house, they tried to come out the back. Of course, the police were shooting into the front. They tried to go out the back, and these officers are shooting. Also, the officer who decided to put together the device that exploded was another officer who was at the 1978 incident. And he put in TVX4, whatever, but he said it wasn't enough. He put in more. And another person who was a consultant was Daryl Gates from Los Angeles, the founder of SWAT. So he's the one, because they did a similar thing in Los Angeles. What was I forgot the name of the group. But they used one of these devices. So they dropped it, and the order was to let it burn. The police commissioner said that it wasn't his call to put the fire out. The fire commissioner said that he was waiting for the police commissioner to tell him to put the fire out, but they thought that shooting was coming from the house, so they didn't want to put the fire out. So 2 blocks get destroyed. Irony, the MOVE house, that was Louise Africa's house, she was fined and had to pay a fine for the destruction of her house. Only other person who went to jail, other than Ramona, was a contractor. They got a shoddy contractor. He redid the houses that were inhabitable. Those are the only two people who went to jail. There was a move commission after that. And what they really tried to prove with the commission was that the police were just out of hand. And you know what? The police chose their own weaponry that day, whatever they wanted. And even the police commissioner said, well, I did think that the weapons they selected was over the top. It was just too much. Your police commissioner said that, right? So Mumia, how all this comes together. If we go back to 1968 with the Panther Raid, Mumia was one of the founding members of the Black Panthers in Philadelphia, even though he was only in high school at the time. He was a good writer, and he sold newspapers. Philadelphia sold more Panther papers than any other area. The police knew him. And one of the Panthers said that Officer Fensel, put a clip there, would come by and he would see Mumia standing on the street and he would go like this with his fingers. This is in the 70s. They knew exactly who Mumia was. So here when we get up to 1981 and you have the killing of Faulkner, Officer Faulkner, and of course Mumia's on the scene, and that's a whole nother couple of books right there about exactly what happened. But I'm telling you, you do not have to be versed in the law to see the holes in that case. You know, it was just now criminal justice scholars are calling Mumia the exception. You know, every rule that was established by the Supreme Court was thrown out the window when it got to Mumia's case, just like with the MOVE people. But what I did in this chapter was I wanted to expose the power of the Fraternal Order of Police. So I juxtaposed Mumia's story with the FOP to just show you how far the FOP would go. In Paris, there was a street named after Mumia. Philadelphia police went to Paris to take the sign down. They went to Congress, right, to have Paris condemned for naming that street. The wife, Maureen Faulkner, and I kind of look, I mean, what do you think? Your husband was just killed. They were newlyweds. I believe at the beginning she was very naive. Why would she even think that the FOP would use her, you know, to get their agenda across? I think as it goes later on, that naivety goes away. Because even during the trial of Mumia, she really, I'm not going to say lie, but she exaggerated. Number one, the police were escorting her into court and back out. And she reported that the MOVE people yelled at her and spit on her. Come on. And then she said that when Faulkner's bloody shirt was shown in court, that the MOVE people, that Mumia laughed. Mumia wasn't even in the courtroom that day. And then she said, oh, okay, maybe I made a mistake. So, you know, just, she was able, when one of Mumia's books was published, she hired it would have to be a regular private plane to fly over the publisher's building with a sign, cop killers. Now, she works in a medical office. How does she get money like that? You know, I mean, she has a website, and she's actually still on the payroll. Even though she's with another man and lives in California, she wants to keep her health benefits. So she didn't marry him. So we're still in our taxes paying for her health care and everything else. But how did she get the money to do this? You know, and one author who was doing a talk in North California, she hired a private plane and went up there to disrupt the proceedings. Where did you get the money? She flew back and forth for every one of Mumia. You know how many times Mumia has gone to court. She was there, okay? So the FOP, their thing is Mumia has to die, and if he does not die, that signals to other police officers across the nation that they are not protected. When did the objective of police officers be to protect themselves? I thought it said to protect and serve, but all that has changed. Now they're out there, and their primary goal is protecting themselves. They'll tell you, I have to get home tonight, you know, regardless of what it takes. So all that has changed. The judge in Mumia's case, go back to your paper clip. You remember the COPAR, the coalition, and the Philly case? All right. At the time, Anthony Jackson was the director of PILCOP, the Philadelphia Police Institution. Guess who's going to be appointed as Mumia's lawyer? He hadn't been in a courtroom in ages. Didn't even do criminal charges. They made him Mumia's lawyer. Didn't give him any resources. Everything he asked for, the judge said no. Witnesses were not allowed to come in. He didn't have money to go to interview witnesses. And even Mumia was frustrated. He says, I don't want him anymore. Sabo says, no, you're going to have to keep him. But one of Sabo's clerks heard him say, I'm going to help them fry it. And Judge Sabo was also a lifetime member of the Fraternal Order of Police. Right. Only in Pennsylvania on appeal, you can't change judges. The case goes back to the same judge. That's why he couldn't get out of that cycle, because the thinking of Pennsylvania legislators is if the original judge has the best information on the case. So that's why he had to keep going back. Mumia's not going to get any relief until he finally gets a different judge, right? And one of the officers says, Mumia wants to be a revolutionary, he'll be a dead one. He said that when Mumia was in high school. High school. They knew him. So, of course, then we have our Black Lives Matter, and this all comes full circle with Rizzo, right? Of course, they wanted to take the statue down, and it was finally moved. But the police, now in this case, is still ongoing. When the police used tear gas and rubber bullets on people who were protesting. Now, the organization Bread and Roses did receive a grant to help people in West Philadelphia off 52nd Street with mental health because of the trauma that they felt after this. So, wrapping up, there have been major reforms. I tell you, if it wasn't for Black Lives Matter, we cannot underestimate the power of Black Lives Matter. That was a game changer, really. So there have been all types of reforms. You have your Michael Brown, depending on what happened, such as with Sandra Bland, the reform would be breaking and entering, going in. You have your George Floyd to get rid of chokeholds. Well, Pennsylvania had already stopped using chokeholds, but this is how cunning they are. Instead of using chokeholds, they now use cartoid holds. What's a cartoid hold? A chokehold by another name. So they really did, but only and I don't like it when I say this, but it's true. But only 1% of the people killed by police are killed by asphyxiation. This whole thing with body cameras. Well, I mean, they have to turn them on. And then in Pennsylvania, we don't have the right to see what they shoot unless they give it to us. So we actually, with the Irizarry case and this last one with Spencer, these were just two rare cases where we have been able to see the footage of what happens. The defund, we only have 18,000 policing units in America. Over $6 billion have been spent in the transfer of armaments. Now, Pennsylvania and Philadelphia has done that. We've pulled out the 1033 program that sends military arms to cities. One city wanted a submarine. Okay. Limit police immunity. They want to make officers responsible, because even if you have, really the only redress we have is what they call Section 1983, where you sue the police. And you hear that in the news, so-and-so got $5,000, $5 billion, whatever. Well, the Supreme Court has changed the criteria for 1983 lawsuits, so it makes it very difficult now. You don't automatically get that. You have to file suit, and again, you have to prove that the officer did not know, that the officer knew what they were doing was a constitutional violation. And if you can't do that, you actually cannot sue the police. Now, the other thing is the Fourth Amendment, and this brings us into the present moment with illegal search and seizure. And this is where I go back to predacious policing. When people get shot, at what point do they usually get killed? Usually it's when your first encounter with the police, when they're talking to you, right? When they stop you, your next step is they're talking to you, and then if anything goes wrong, that's when you get killed. The Fourth Amendment does not apply to any of that. Your Fourth Amendment only comes into place once you are apprehended and detained. Okay? But most killings happen when? Before that. Before that. And we just had a major example, it's pitiful, sad, just with the Spencer killing. What happened? Stop and frisk gone wrong. What in the world would the police do? Now, there are three different versions of this story, so I'm just giving one. The police go into a store. There are men standing around, and they start searching them. What? And of course, you know what's going to happen, a scuffle, a gunshot, and Spencer's dead. So there's different versions. Of course, they have cameras. They didn't turn them on. They didn't have them on, all right? And so this whole notion of stop and frisk was still up in the air, because I'm thinking, I'm confused. Do you remember, was it last year's election when we voted to set up CPOC, our Civilian Review Board? This next question was to have a constitutional amendment to do what? End stop and frisk?
Yeah. Right, yeah.
I'm like, well, what happened to that? You know, so now we have a new mayor, of course, well, she's not only one did it, Nutter did it too. Under Nutter, increased stop and frisk, but she wants to bring it back, and we see what happens, Spencer, and we're going to see more of that, you know. So she has a director of police safety. What are you supposed to do? I don't know. He's making good money, but it seems to me he's going to come in after the fact. What are you going to do before? And we have a new police commissioner who says, at least the new police commissioner does mention, well, we do need some social services. I don't see that coming out the mayor. All I hear is, it's law and order. You know, we're going to send more people to jail. So I don't know. I don't know what to tell y'all. So to conclude, number one, the FOP has to come down. They are not a union. They're an association. They're civilians. Why do they get special treatment? They need to be part of civilian unions. You know, this special treatment needs to be stopped. All right? And Black Lives Matter and those groups calling for abolition of police, this is what they're all saying. We need to get rid of problems of racism, poverty, mental illness. 50% of the people killed by the police suffer from some type of mental illness. Irizarry, who was killed, he was schizophrenic. And this also shows you the nature of the police that has not really changed. What did that officer do? He jumps out his car, he runs over to Irizarry, pulls his gun out, I will shoot your effing head off. What? You know, Ramsey talked about that, the language they used. That was totally unnecessary. Then they just kill him. And then to make matters worse, what does Dahl do? This shows the arrogance. Arrogance. You know, he lies. Outlaw says you need to come in, we need to talk about this. No, I'm not coming in. Right? They take him in. What does the judge do? Oh, we don't have enough to. They didn't even give him bail. They just sent him home. You just murdered somebody, but you're a police officer. Oh, you go home. Right? So if it wasn't for the citizens in an uproar, those charges would not have been reinstated. And we still don't know what's happening. They're waiting for time to pass. Right. Time to pass, before they bring Dahl in. But and this is the problem. This is the problem. This is Rizzoism. That arrogance. I'm special. I can do what I want. We're still dealing with it. How did he know that he could get away with that? How did he know to have that attitude? From watching his superiors, talking to other officers. He was new. He was a new officer. You don't go in a job acting like that unless you really don't want it. You a little humble. You listen to people, don't you? Not him. So I think he really encapsulates the problem that we have. So we have to restructure police. There's predatory policing. I like what one author called, he calls it serendipity policing. That they'll pull enough people in, they'll search enough people in, and maybe they'll get lucky and find a gun or some drugs or something, which they rarely do. And then I think that the dissents in Rizzo, Good, and U.S. Philly need to be revisited. Holding the superior's office accountable. Having an injunction. Withholding federal funds. They just carte blanche get as much money as they want. And Obama gave them more money than any other president. After he had a beer with the officer. So our major problems in reforming the police is the FOP and the Supreme Court. Because of the Fourth Amendment, the Supreme Court has become the official watchguard of the police. And what have they done? They have told you, one author says, they have erased, RACE, the Fourth Amendment. They have. Through all their interpretations of the Fourth Amendment, they always give the deference to the police. So the Supreme Court has actually normalized police brutality, and they should be held responsible for everybody who is killed by the police. So now that I made y'all extremely happy, thank you very much.